This episode has a trigger warning. We will be talking about suicide, the cult, family issues, and mental and physical challenges. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to I Care About You, the podcast where we dive deep into what it's like to live in this human experience and to be flawed and working on it and trying to figure it out and feeling lost and feeling found and feeling hopeless and feeling empowered, all those parts of life that are just so present as we move along our journeys. I'm your host, Juliana J, and I have the most amazing guest today. You are going to love her. Debbie has been on this incredible journey of writing about 7 days in a facility in San Francisco. She'll tell you all about what that was like, why she came to write the memoir, and what it means to her to share her story with all of you, as well as what you can learn from her story. It's really an incredible journey through finding yourself in a cult, escaping, finding yourself then in an institution in San Francisco where you found out that you had tried to complete a suicide but were unsuccessful, and then working through all of the emotional, mental, physical challenges that ensued thereafter. So please welcome the most incredible Debbie Hartung to the podcast.
Hello, and Debbie, welcome to the podcast. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, Juliana. I'm so very happy and honored to be here. Thank you so much.
Great. I know, we're so excited to have you. Your book is so amazing. Let's see, I'll show it to everybody here. The Factory of Maladies. I wanted, since you sent this book to me originally, I wanted to ask you about the title. How did you come up with the title? What is the meaning of it for you?
Sure. So the title comes from a paragraph in the book, and the impetus was really when I was in a very draining and dreary occupational therapy, mandatory, sort of therapy session. And I had this big aha moment and this disclosure. And I sort of disclosed to the group that I thought that the reason I was being held against my will was because I had actually tried to commit suicide. And the people I was with were in so much pain and just so really emotionally unavailable because they were going through so much themselves. There was hardly a flicker of any emotion or recognition when I shared this sort of bombshell. And to me at the time, I realized that, filling out a little piece of paper and doing some calisthenics and these therapy sessions, and the therapists were well-meaning, but to me, it sort of felt like we were in a human factory of sadness and maladies where we weren't really given the tools to heal properly.
Right. Wow, that just paints such a picture of, I think that was one of the things so amazing in your book is just you painted these pictures that were it was almost like you were there. It was almost like you could reach out and touch the bed frame or the table or whatever setting that you were in and almost like just feel the people's presence. And I really loved that about this book. Now, it's 7 days in a San Francisco Psych Ward. This is a memoir, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Yeah. Do you want to give us an overall, just sort of the elevator speech about what the book is about and what the takeaways are you hope people have?
Sure, I'd love to. So the book, as you mentioned, is a memoir, and it's about a week in my life, during which time I was on a legal hold in a publicly funded San Francisco psychiatric ward. So I was being held there against my will. And when I awoke on the psychiatric ward, I could not remember how I got there, or I couldn't really remember much about the last year of my life in general. And the only reason I knew my name was because it was written on my hospital wristband. And so my memories were fragmented. I was confused and disoriented. And the book is really about unraveling the mystery of how I ended up on a psychiatric ward. And it also goes into detail about my stay. And why I really feel that it's important is because I really want to shed light on the stigmas that surround mental illness in general. I saw some very sad, horrible things during my tenure on the psychiatric ward. And I saw that not only myself, but my fellow patients were treated at times almost like we were criminals. And I feel that although it's uncomfortable for me sometimes to step out of my little shell and put myself out in the world in such a big way, that I can really help alleviate the feelings of shame that people with mental illness may experience, and specifically those that have experienced suicidal ideation or attempted suicide.
Right, right. I think that's so important because if the just, we're all human. We all go through things. We all experience things. And when we feel so much shame around it, we really don't get the help that we need. We can't even understand the help that we need or what that help would even look like. And we just kind of feel lost. And that was one thing that really came through in the book for me is just this overall feeling of people just felt lost in the system. They're just like floating there, not knowing what happens next. Certainly you were feeling that way, like, why am I here? How long am I here? What's the purpose of being here? Where was I yesterday? Because um, the whole fuzziness about your memory, that had a lot to do with medications and things, correct?
It did, yes. So I think it was two-pronged. Or maybe three-pronged. It had to do with the medications. And for me, that was the medication that I stopped taking for about a year prior to my hospitalization. So, due to that, I was experiencing immense PTSD and trauma that was constantly replaying in my mind. And then the third issue that really contributed to my fragmented memory was that I suffered a neurological injury as a result of my suicide attempt. So that in conjunction with just feeling lost in the system and confused and the additional trauma of being in such a hospital was enough to confuse anyone, I think.
Right, right. And I mean, there's so much there's so much we don't know about what happens in those facilities. And for me, I was really struck by this is a story happening in modern day. This isn't a story that was happening in the 20s or the turn of the century or prior to. This was actually new, like happening in our lifetimes recently. And that just really, really struck me as wow, it's important for people to know because I think a lot of people will put people in 72-hour watch or things like that. And I mean, sometimes that is so necessary and all that can be done or what needs to be done. And I'm not saying anything to downplay that decision because it's not an easy decision by any means, but just that we make these decisions and we don't have the full understanding of all the facets of it or what it is, or even how to advocate for someone that does find themselves in that kind of a system as the support structure. Like you don't really know how to advocate for someone who finds themselves in these places or what people need. And you so beautifully illustrated that in the book of, what you needed but wasn't receiving and how small, simple things could have made such an impact. But because you didn't have that, you were just kind of just I don't I want to say navigating, but that you weren't even navigating because you didn't even have the tools to navigate what was what was happening. It was almost like a horrible nightmare of some kind. And I think it's also important for people to know, like, how can I advocate for my loved one who finds themselves in this situation? And you kind of illustrated that at the end of the book when you finally you get to you have a conversation with your aunt, I believe, who, if you want to tell a little bit about your aunt's uh, part of the story, I think that would be really great. And then towards the end of the book, you kind of chat with her and what that was like. Like what role did she play in the beginning? What role did she play at the end? And overall, how did that make you feel about, family, relationships, trust, all the things?
Yes, I'd love to dive deep into that with you. So, in the beginning, I will say my aunt, from the time I was a young child through my adulthood, had been someone that I really trusted. And she took a special liking to me when I was a kid. And I valued her relationship in my life. And when I was 24, she sort of approached me and said, I want to give you a college graduation gift. And she took me on this trip to Egypt with her friends. And it turned out to be basically an indoctrination into her new age group at the time. And because I'm just hardwired to be an incredibly trusting person, no matter what, and sort of the eternal optimist type. And, like everyone, I have my flaws and my wounds. And this group, although I had great things in my life going for me, seemed to tap into something that I thought I needed or that was going to help heal me or make me feel better in some way. And so as I became more involved in the group, then different aspects of my life started to shift in this radical way. And one of the main things is that, so it started out with some sage and a goddess honoring trip. And then it sort of spiraled into a distrust of vaccines, Western medicine in general, especially psychiatry, an influx of healing sessions that I needed to pay for that were going to heal my karmic wounds, which basically was my mental health issues that were coming to light. And before I knew it, I was down on my meds and my healing sessions were increased. And I was just so vulnerable. And the big change from when it was a group to when it slid into a cult dynamic, it happened so quickly. I think it was just in a 3-month span. And at this time, I believe that my aunt, although she thought she was acting in my best interest, she really, from her perspective, the more I participated in the cult, i.e., the more money I spent on sessions, the more I disengaged from my life. And that includes my wonderfully loving partner, my artistic career, my career as a writer, a lot of the things that made me happy, including all of my psychiatric medications. It just happened in like the blink of an eye. And then when my partner Krishna went to India to visit his family, it became sort of a guru dynamic. And the leader of the cult knew that I was alone. And he had been acting as my therapist of sorts. So he knew that I was suicidal, that I was incredibly lonely, and that I was fragile emotionally, physically, spiritually, on every level. And unfortunately, while Krishna was away, I once again reiterated that I was having suicidal ideations. And this time, instead of just saying, oh, I know, and sort of brushing me off, he said, well, it's your karma and it's basically your time to die. So if you are going to do this, why don't you think about leaving your money to people that will carry on, the good works of the group, i.e., leave it to him.
Mhm.
So that's sort of the background. And unfortunately, my aunt is still brainwashed by this man and this group. And she um, tried to help me after I had attempted suicide. But she really believed that if I had followed this guru's teachings, that I wouldn't have ended up in this Western medicine hamster wheel, as she sort of referred to it. And she did everything she could when I was in the hospital. I think she felt threatened on a lot of different ways. And the possibility of her guru being exposed were really real, even if it was subconsciously. I know she felt that. And so she actually tried to keep me in this facility that was adding to my PTSD and my anxiety and my trauma, and sort of did everything she could to keep my partner away from me and keep us from being happy together. And, at first, I couldn't quite wrap my head around the whys. And now I really understand it. And at the end of my book, she's walking, I'm free, I'm out of the hospital, I'm with Krishna, and she's walking down this hill, steep hill in San Francisco, and she's ranting and raving to herself. And Krishna and I just sort of looked at each other and we were thinking the same thing, like, which one is truly mentally ill in this situation? And unfortunately, um, I think I wasn't the only one suffering from a bout of mental unwellness.
Right. Wow, that it's just there's so much to unpack there, which is something that you talk about in the book, which I'm sure a lot of people ask you about, is that whole the cult dynamic. Um, I think it's it's a fascination people have, and it's kind of been glorified, I guess, in the media now and again, or whatnot. But um, it's interesting to like this is a true, honest reflection on what it was like for you to be in that situation and how so easily, I mean, I can really put myself in your shoes in that how easily you can, before you know it, you're in this space because that you would have never gone to if it was day one you went there, you might have questioned it, but the indoctrination into it is such a shift of reality, and it's such a metaphor for life in that our reality is what we make it, right? It's not really this hard and fast thing that everyone else is experiencing exactly the same. Reality is really different with each individual, and how easy you can fall. And I think we can apply that to many things that happen in our lives, like we're at work and the reality becomes doing things that maybe we wouldn't ethically do otherwise, but because the reality and the work culture of that particular space is making us feel like that's just how it is, or what you do, or this is going to be helpful. And obviously, where somebody preyed on your needs, your needs, and people are really good about preying on others. Some people, not all people, preying on others when uh, they sense a weakness, and that's the entry point, or they sense, oh, here's something I can manipulate into whatever it is, someone's self-worth or someone's where they are in their lives or their devotion to their aunt or, whatever it might be. And I want to ask you, because I've struggled with this myself, obviously not to the degree to which you are. These analogies I'm making are far less uh, hard. They're not as hard at all, but I can see the kind of relationship. But how did you work your way back to trust after all of that happened? Because everywhere that you talk about in the book, you experience this lack of trust in the cult, lack of trust there, lack of trust. You couldn't trust them. You couldn't trust the facility you ended up in. You can't trust your family. You don't know who you can trust because you're not allowed to talk to people. How did you reclaim your trust?
So that's a great question. And I will say it was a journey of probably 10 years. I think it's been a decade of reclaiming my trust and my power and my healing around, this whole hospitalization. And I think having a really stable partner was my saving grace, because when he arrived at the hospital and I was convinced, with my aunt sort of at the helm of this thought that I had done something terrible and really, really bad and wrong, which sort of compounded with the shame and guilt I was just experiencing. And I remember apologizing profusely to him. And he said, "There's nothing to forgive." And that's a line, that's one of his famous lines. And when he says that, he really means it. And it just means like, it's okay. There's no harm done. You didn't do anything wrong. Like, let's just move on in this moment. And when he said that to me, it sort of broke my heart wide open, because it had been so, so very close for so long. And I knew I could trust him. And at that time, we had been together 11 years, and he stood by me through a lot. And he always wanted the best for me. So it began with a baby step of trusting him.
Mm.
And he was so wonderful and compassionate. And I really couldn't have asked for friend or partner at that time. So I had Krishna, and then I realized that I could trust my best friend, whom I had pushed away for a year, Alicia, although she was in New York. So I had her. And then a really big turning point was that although I was sort of forced to go to an outpatient program, I actually ended up loving it. And the 6 weeks that I spent there showed me that I could trust psychiatrists again, that I could trust therapists and caregivers, and that not everybody was going to sort of just treat me as someone in distress that needed to be stabilized and sort of gotten rid of as quickly as possible, sort of moved on to the next point in the queue sort of thing. So once I had that foundation, and that took a few months, then I was ready to really tackle part of my physical healing. And it's inferred in the book, but I did have quite a severe brain injury from my suicide attempt. And I still have neurological deficits to this day, but I am healed, I would say like 90%. So healing my body, my brain, and that gave me a lot of confidence to sort of be in the world again. And then I coupled that with writing and visual art. And that really, I think, after the first year, I started to feel like myself again. And at first I was, such a wreck. I would ask the same questions over and over again because I couldn't remember what I had said. And it was very evident that I had been through something quite traumatic. But after the first year or two, I started to think and function in a more familiar way. And so that gave me, I would say, the confidence. And I also had to cut my aunt out of my life, and I extricated myself from the New Age group. And that was also one of the best things that I could have done for my healing.
Right, right. Definitely. That's that whole thing about boundaries always comes up in life over and over. And so I want to talk about so much here. I want to talk about boundaries. I'm going to make a note for circle back to boundaries. But so tell us how, because I talk a lot about journaling and writing and doing art as part of your healing process, and that you are someone who added that with writing this book and all the art that you do, which is wonderful. And I'll link her website in the description so y'all can go there and see her amazing website with really. I have one of her pieces. I'm getting on a tangent, but I have one of her pieces which I look at every day when I do my little morning routine, and I send you a little love every day.
Oh,
So
thank you.
I do. Yeah, but anyway, that's a whole tangent about. I want to talk about how art and writing this book played a role in your healing process, and how did you even know? Did you just start because that's familiar, and was it painful, or releasing, or tell us how you started, you got on that journey, and then what benefits you got from it.
So I would love to tell you how I started. It was it happened very quickly. And again, my loving partner, Krishna, noticed that I was having really intense PTSD from my hospitalization. And although my memory was fragmented still and very hazy, some things haunted me, little details that I could not escape them. And I could sense them. I could taste the bland hospital food. I could smell the day room. I could feel it all. And he said, you have to, he knew that I had a history as a writer. And he said, you have to just journal and just free yourself from these details and this pain that's haunting you. And I realized he was right. And then I saw a doctor, and I was having, in addition to my cognition deficits, I was having a lot of neuropathy in my hands and feet. And it was really challenging to just even lift a coffee cup because my hands were shaking so badly and I could barely feel them. And he sort of said to me in a blatant way, use it or lose it. And I sort of looked at him and he said, you have to use your hands. You have to rebuild, the sensations, and you have to get your brain and your body to talk to each other again. And so with that, I really thought, okay, I'm scared. I wanted to be able to walk normally. I wanted to be able to use my hands and have my brain return to a, healthy amount of functioning. So that, and then Krishna's advice was really all it took. And he used to work on the weekends. And so I would go to various cafes in San Francisco and I had this journal and I would just write stream of consciousness without, for once, I didn't judge myself about what I was writing or worry about grammar or spelling or even punctuation. And I wrote in the shakiest hand, just everything. And I just started from the top, which became the prologue. And it took me 7 years to actually write my entire story because it was painful. Because the more I wrote in the beginning, the more my PTSD flashbacks increased. And, it was quite painful emotionally. And then about halfway through, I just had this realization that I wasn't having flashbacks or anxiety when I was writing and that my handwriting had changed. So it sort of went back to a legible version and my hands had stopped shaking at some point, but it was so natural. I didn't really notice. And I was walking in a normal manner. I mean, normal for me, my normal gait. And I really think that it was the power of the written word and, in conjunction with painting, that process really healed me neurologically and physically, in addition to taking my medication as prescribed and seeing a psychiatrist.
Right, right. That's a good point. So during this time when you were really, uh, when the process of healing through writing actually intensified the things that you were trying to work through, you had a big support system around you for that, which included medical professionals or therapists, and then also your personal support system, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And I just have to say that always my medical support system came first. And if I didn't have that, for me, in my experience, if I wasn't taking my medication, if I wasn't seeing a therapist and a doctor, then the other healing would have been impossible.
Right, right. That is such a valuable point.
Yeah, I needed that foundation.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, that's really amazing, your process of writing. It's always so interesting to hear writers process in their writing and then at one point you realized you were free a little.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was quite a momentous occasion. And the fact that it happened in such a fluid nature and I didn't even notice because I was so in the zone with my creativity it was something really special. I'll never forget that.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, did you have that's a huge aha moment, but, did you have others while writing, where you were like, "Oh, this is an epiphany," or, "Oh, I connected the dots here," or, these small moments where you can go, "Oh, that's what that was. That wasn't me, that was this," or, how whatever the healing part is of the did you have those throughout your writing time, or how did that present itself to you?
I did have some of those epiphanies, especially, I realized, oh, my distrust of, psychiatric meds and wanting to do things naturally, that came from the influence of the cult. So I realized, okay, that's not what I really think and value. So I can let that go. Um, and I also had realizations and some softening and a lot of compassion actually for the staff that worked in the
Mm.
hospital because in the book, I think at that moment I was incredibly critical to many of them. When in retrospect, I realized that just like everyone else, they're doing the best they can do and they have an incredibly taxing job without adequate funding, training, and they're usually overworked and incredibly tired and running on empty. Um, and their profession really requires a lot of caregiving and compassion on so many levels. So I was able to have that realization too, which really um, it helped heal me too. I would say.
Mhm. Yeah, compassion and empathy is such a great healing tool because you can kind of see yourself in others in some way, and that's really That's really wonderful that through writing, you kind of came across that process because it's so, even though you know it, like, all of us on the journey, we know that's the jam, but,
Mhm.
to then put it into practice is, is such an art form, I think. It just takes this moment of pause to go, yes, I can have compassion for this person, even though they're challenging or I feel they wronged me or whatever it is. So that's such a valuable lesson you throw out there. And that in that space, there is this great moment of healing for yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. And one more thing I'd like to add on that topic was that I think one of the greatest gifts was that I released this shame that I
Mm.
had surrounding my suicide attempt and how my mental illness manifested. And I did experience a fair amount of stigma and judgment from the world at large. But through all of the various tools that we've talked about, I realized that I didn't do anything wrong. I was actually in such a dire place and in so much pain. I actually thought the world would be better off without me. And I think that's something in society today that I think people need to catch up with the fact that those that are in dark, really intense places like that, the last thing they need is to be judged for it because it's the time when you actually need the most care, the most compassion, and the most understanding.
That's so, so, so true. I talk about that in my book. Just that judgment, a non-judging space allows people to find what they need, and it it's so hard because you need it everywhere you go, you meet it somewhere by strangers, people you know and love. You perceive it everywhere, even if it isn't what's happening in your mind, you're perceiving it. It's so it's so important. And how did you let through the writing and the art and all the modalities you were able to let go of shame? And when you did you know it when it happened, or did you just feel it at one point and realize like, oh, that's left my body?
I think it was so another thing that was so gradual and just so natural. I didn't quite have one of those aha moments. But I will say that when I was editing my journal entries and sort of preparing them as a book just for friends and family at that point, I reread, and I tried to just pretend that this really wasn't my story; it was just someone's story. And when I did that and had that sort of space, I realized, wow, I wouldn't judge anyone else on the planet who went through this as harshly as I judge myself. And I really, that's viewing my book through, just the eyes of a regular reader really shifted my perspective. And then sharing my story, although, I was reluctant at first, the more I spoke to people, almost everybody, and not in a group setting, but later would text me and say, oh, I had an attempt when I was a teenager, or my best friend committed suicide during postpartum depression, or the stories go on. And I realized everybody, most people spoken to, have suffered from a mental health challenge to some degree in their life. And if they haven't, someone very close to them has. So I really, really think that it's very common, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. Just like if you had high cholesterol, you would, modify your diet and exercise, potentially take a statin, and move on with your life. So that's sort of how I try to reframe mental illness these days.
That's great. I wish everyone perceived it that way because we forget how close we are to all of these things because, we live in a world where we're supposed to be perfect all the time. And it's very hard to like acknowledge parts of even yourself or your family or other, it's so much easier just to judge them, right? Because, you know, that's easy. But the hard work is seeing yourself, you know. And I love what you said about how your writing was not only cathartic as you were moving through it the first time, but when you went back and reread it, you also got, wisdom from yourself. It's so incredible. It's just so beautiful. I'm so glad you brought that up because I have goosebumps from it. What a great tool, that's so amazing that the wisdom lies within you.
Yes.
You're
Thank
you're just unleashing it,
Yeah.
and I love that you decided to share your story. I mean, how hard was that to put it out there in a book for just any old person to pick up and read?
It was so challenging. And now I can just laugh about it because it was, if I had known at the time, honestly, Krishna he really encouraged me, and I was quite naive. I had no idea what self-publishing a book would entail or how out of my comfort zone I would be, but he knew, and he really encouraged me anyway to really to go through this process. And so it was a shock at first. I didn't quite grasp that, a stack of papers from journal entries, how it could, the process of making it, into a book took months, and so many little technical logistical things that I wasn't prepared for. But emotionally it was quite scary at first, but then it actually, I think it's become one of my greatest joys and the ultimate catharsis, really and truly.
Wow, that's amazing. It's such a testament to, something that you could perceive as tragic and devastating and so many things which on some levels it'll kind of always hold those words in that experience will always hold those words, but you just have this beautiful lesson for us in that tragedy, in that horrible moment, in the the worst moments of your life can be these beautiful jewels, these beautiful gifts, these, if you're willing to pry it open and look inside and kind of move through the pain of doing that, there's something beautiful in that you would never know, right? Did you ever think, oh, I'm going to write it and become a writer and da 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 until it became something real and tangible?
Exactly. I did take some writing classes in college, and I always thought, oh, I'll just write some short stories, or maybe I could write for a traveling magazine because I love to explore the world and travel. And then it just sort of, and my career led me in different directions, and I just sort of lost that dream that I had had since I was a teenager. So it really, it was quite a happy surprise that I ended up being able to write something and share something so personal, but also that could potentially help others.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, on so many, you've only touched on a few of the ways your work touches people, but there's so much in there that is just this deep, deep wisdom. And I love how you impart the wisdom on us, not in a book of how to or this is what this is, but through your actual life story. It's not, like mine is sort of this manual for what to do and how to do it and shifting perspective or whatever. But yours is this deep wisdom wrapped in the story of a moment of your life. And I think that's so meaningful because we can all put ourselves there on some level.
Yeah, thank you. And I do think that everyone has a moment in their life that, is an opportunity to step back and may potentially hold the opportunity for a big healing and catharsis as well.
Right, right. Totally, totally. Let me look at okay. I want to circle back to boundaries, which I wrote down, and how you were talking about you had to set kind of the part of your healing process was setting boundaries. Some were probably quite obvious to you, but others might not have been. And how did you realize this is where I need a boundary or a division, or I need to advocate for myself, or I need to put myself first here? How did you know what those times were?
So that's a very important question. I will just be very honest and say that I still struggle with boundaries on a daily basis because I just think it's my nature. I'm a people pleaser for whatever reason. So that being said, having better boundaries than I've had in the past has been, it's definitely been challenging, but also felt very different and strange at first, but now it feels really healthy and good. So I think with all things, time sort of is this magical healer. But in the beginning, it was, like you said, some things were really obvious. Like, my aunt did not have my best interests at heart. So I did confront her, and that was something that was challenging, but I felt like I had to do for myself. So that was sort of a boundary that over a written letter that I was going to sort of state from my perspective what had happened and her part in that. And unfortunately, I gave her the option. I said, if you want to be in my life, I can't know that you're associating with this guru and this cult. You have to make a choice. And she chose the guru and the cult, which was it really broke me at first. So that was, but as time went on, I realized it was probably a gift. So that was sort of like ripping the Band-Aid off in terms of setting boundaries and asserting my power and healing. And then as little things would come up. So because of my neurological issues, I noticed that I have a very short attention span now. So I have to really be mindful, I would say, with just the amount of time that I spend on a project or talking with people or, reading these sort of things. So that was a learning curve. And also, listening to my physical body, which is in a much different place than it was. So, some of them came a lot easier than others, but I will say the more I practiced putting the boundaries in place, the easier they become. And now it's sort of like a knee-jerk reaction on a good day that I still, I still slip.
Well, I mean, I think we all do. I feel
Right.
like boundaries is a lifelong thing, and there's such an art between, like, you don't want it to be too most boundaries, you don't want it to be too rigid, but you don't want it to be too flexible. And then what is that? It's really an art. And
Well said. Yes.
yeah, wow. I want to touch on a little bit about. I have this happen to me a lot, and I really struggle with boundaries. It's also people pleaser. But, like, if I set a boundary and in my mind I think, "Oh, this person will honor the boundary or will, choose me," or whatever, and that you had this boundary with your aunt and that didn't happen, did you how did you feel? Did you feel like, "Okay, I'm no good at boundaries," or, like, what kind of internal dialogue did you have with yourself not to just go, "Okay, never mind,"
Right. Yes, that was definitely quite a conversation I had with myself, with my partner, my doctor, my therapist. Anyone that would listen heard about it. So, that was a tough one. And although it was challenging, I think in my gut, I knew that it really, in the long term, was for the best.
Mm.
And I felt proud of myself for, stating my perspective, which is something that I really hadn't done before. So I tried to focus on the positives, that I stood up for myself in a way and I
Mhm.
told the truth. And then when it didn't go the way I expected, that was when as you talked about, things were really challenging. But, I think within a few months I was okay with it because I actually found a freedom in not having that influence in my life.
Mm. Yeah, so important. Yeah. I Throughout this conversation, I feel this, kind of reoccurring theme, which is a really hard thing to master or even know how to do it, but it's really you're saying a lot of things that make me bring up for me that you are your best advocate. And so much of the time we are our best critic, but not our best advocate. And advocating for ourselves seems like selfish or pompous or, what conceited, whatever it is. Even now, various terms get thrown around when you try to advocate for yourself. And so we're smushed back into not advocating for ourselves and being our best critic. And I just love that you bring this up, that is so, so important in the healing journey and just in finding worth for yourself. And I just want to acknowledge that, like, how did you realize, like, I need to advocate for myself. I need to be my own best friend. I need to be my own advocate here. I need to set an example so that everyone else knows the expectation. Because if I'm beating myself down, it's very easy for others to join in the conversation. Or, I have to shift that dynamic in my life. And how how did you know? And I'm sure that's probably a lifelong kind of thing, is remembering to advocate for yourself. But how did you know? And did that really just is that kind of shifted your whole perspective on how you view the world and yourself and the others in it and people you interact with? I know it's a very broad question, but anything you could provide us with on how to be your best advocate, I think would really be helpful.
Okay, well, sure. I'm happy to give you my thoughts on that, and thank you for the lovely compliments. And yes, I'd say that being my own advocate is something that I have to work on. I choose to work on every day. And in the beginning, it felt like, flexing a muscle that was very weak, and it took a lot of practice, and it felt strange and out of the ordinary. But I think, after being on the psychiatric ward, I realized that I had been trying to advocate for myself, but it just my cries for help and my self advocacy wasn't listened to. I just wasn't being heard. So I think that was the start of trying to speak up for myself. And then I had this sort of realization that I had been letting people take advantage of me in various forms, since I was a little kid, and that I really owed it to myself after being through such a traumatic incident to try to take care of myself to the best of my ability, whatever that looked like. And so that's when I really started to make strong boundaries. And I noticed that the things that didn't serve me and the people that didn't have my best interests, when I set boundaries, the people disappeared, which was painful at first, but also for, my highest good. And that everything else just sort of fell away. So it was a very lonely time for me because it happened sort of radically in the first year of my recovery. I really only had my parents, my brother, some family members, and my husband, and maybe 2 friends, and my medical support system. But I realized that as long as I was sort of doing my internal work and focusing on myself, that was more than enough. I didn't really need anything else.
Wow, that's so great. I love what you said. It's the perfect note to end on, in that, how you're just like, you owed it to yourself. You owed it to yourself to show up for yourself, to be there for yourself, to go through those hard times. And I know I think that's why we struggle so much with boundaries, because setting those boundaries means we lose things. And it's hard to see what we gain in the moment, because that is often down the road, right? We're not getting this instant, the right people show up in our lives, or any of that. It doesn't happen like 5 minutes after you set a boundary. But 5 minutes after you set a boundary and the arguments ensue about the boundary, then those people leave. And it's just, setting boundaries requires loss, I feel, most of the time. And I like how you said there was a time frame, maybe that happened right away and it was painful. And how did you deal with that painful moment? Did you I'm just going to sit with this and that's okay? Or what did you do?
Yes. And I do agree with you, about boundaries and loss. And I wish somebody had told me that, because it would have made the process a lot easier rather than just sort of being bombarded with that feeling. So yes, I would say I cried a lot. I let myself feel incredibly, lonely, in the sense for friends or the people that I had thought were, my dear friends and family, that turned out to not be. So I kind of mourned, essentially. And then I tried to focus on the amazing people that I had in my life and the gifts. And really, for me, it goes back to the foundation of taking my medicine and being engaged in creative projects really helped me just move through the uncomfortable emotions.
Wow. Wow. So beautiful. I could talk to you all day about all these things. I feel like I'm sucking up your wisdom, and I so appreciate you being so candid and open and willing to share what you've learned with us, and to write this and to put this out there in the world. So it's just there's just so much people can gain from it, and I feel like, wow, you're just amazing, and I'm so happy you came on the podcast, and I'm just so appreciative to know you. You're wonderful.
Thank you, Juliana. I felt a kinship with you this first time we emailed, and I'm so honored to be here. I'm so grateful to have you as a friend. And also, I really like to thank you for contributing to the resources section of my book. And for those of you that don't know, the resources are generously provided by Juliana from her wonderful book, Reasons to Live. So thank you for that as well. It's really
special. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Please, please, everyone keep an eye out for, if you see Debbie and her book anywhere at your local bookstore doing a signing, please, please go in, meet her, give her a hug, buy her book. You won't be sorry. It's so beautiful. So thank you so much for being here, Debbie.
Thank you, Juliana.
If you or anyone you know are suffering from suicidal ideology, please reach out, the suicide hotline 988. Please share this podcast with somebody who could use it. Know that I love you and know that I care about you. Take good care, my friends.